Hey there, my name is Alex. I am the Silver Mont, and it's the year of the dragon. At least, it is when I'm recording this. It's also, as I'm recording this, not long until Dragon's Dogma 2 is released. The original Dragon's Dogma has my favourite video game dragon in, Grigori. But you know another video game franchise that's been going on for a while and has a lot of cool dragons? Monster Hunter. And yes, the Souls franchise, including Elden Ring. Dragons in fantasy video games, and fantasy in general, have always played an important role. They are the capstone to an adventure in a lot of ways. They are the feather most proud in an adventurer's hat, slay the dragon, take the treasure. Throughout Western culture, the dragon is traditionally an evil beast. Of course there are exceptions. Conversely, Eastern cultures have a different take on them, less evil and less winged. So when we have stereotypical Western dragons designed by, say, Japanese developers, we get an interesting blend in a lot of ways of this creature that can be seen as both holy and demonic. The best dragons are somewhat a chimera of reptilian and feline aspects, the scales of a lizard, the majesty of a lion, and the wings of, well, something winged. With all that in mind, let's talk about dragons in the Souls game. Specifically, the topic of the video, which is the strongest dragon in the Souls universe? Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Shadows Die Twice, and Elden Ring. And no dragons in Bloodborne, really. Keep in mind there is no right or wrong answer here, unless Miyazaki or someone else comes out and flat out tells us, hey, Seath is actually the strongest. If you put him up against all the ancient dragons in Elden Ring, he would choke them all out with his weird tentacle legs. We'll try and measure the feats of these dragons with as much logic as we can. Case in point, General Radahn is stated to have held back the stars in Elden Ring. If we take that literally, that he's able to halt the velocity of immense balls of plasma billions and trillions of kilometers away, well, that would make him not only the strongest character in any Souls title, but potentially one of the strongest fictional characters who can theoretically ignite a universe-wide supernova. As much as I like Radahn, I don't think that's the case. His halting of the stars is more symbolic and figurative, at least if you ask me. And Elden Ring is full of that sort of talk. The Elden Ring, that which commands the stars. For example, can a dragon teleport? Well, some might say that is proof that said dragon can move faster than light. Therefore that dragon can chomp the flash. Some of these attacks aren't really supposed to be taken literally, in my opinion. A dragon teleporting doesn't mean it can move faster than light. It means it has a magical ability to move from one place to another. Hopefully my insane ramblings are making some sort of point, and you're getting that point. We're going to look at things from a different angle. We'll certainly look at the feats of said dragons. We'll also compare their in-game stats, even if that's not entirely fair, as earlier Souls games had far less inflated health pools than later ones. Seath has 5,000 hit points in Dark Souls. Placidusax has 26,000 hit points in Elden Ring. Whilst you certainly could take that to mean that lore-wise Placidusax is 5 times sturdier, and in universe Elden Ring has stronger foes, I don't think we can strictly scale gameplay to lore in that sense. Case in point, Kalameet has 5,000 hit points as well, but Anor Londo didn't want to mess with him, according to Goth. And yet, Midir has 3 times as much health, but was used by the gods as a giant vacuum cleaner. At any rate, we'll take one dragon from each game so that this video isn't 2,000 hours long. We'll pit them against each other and see if we can come up with a winner, shall we? Frankly, I'm going to largely skip Demon Souls and Shadows Die Twice. Largely because the dragons in Demon Souls are not particularly noteworthy, if you ask me. I know, the dragon god. How can the dragon god not be noteworthy? It's just the thing that dragons aren't really a huge part of Demon Souls lore, not to the same extent they are in the other games. So we'll start with Dark Souls, and for me it has to be Kalameet. He is referred to in the game as the last of the ancient dragons, and by Hawkeye Goth as a ferocious dragon indeed. Even mighty Anor Londo dared not provoke his ire. In terms of gameplay, There's nothing too unique about Kalameet beyond his Eye of Calamity, true to his heritage as a likely reference to Kingsfield's Gyra. Kalameet is the Dragon of Calamity. The one-eyed dragon is able to shine the light of calamity upon unfortunate victims. And I think I've just said calamity more in the last few seconds than I have in the last 10 years. But it is in practice a debuff that makes you take twice the damage. From a lore perspective, you could say it's an air of negative fortune. It makes you extremely unlucky. Or maybe it does have a physical effect on you, and makes you more prone to taking damage. Kalameet's black flames are extremely interesting because they would appear to offer proof that Kalameet has been touched in some way by the Abyss. Of course, the legendary Black Dragon might have had black flames to begin with, but the fact that they deal magical and physical damage, just like abyssal sorceries, could be a hint as well. Dragons, at least before Dark Souls 3, do not possess souls, meaning that to some extent they should be immune to the effects of the Abyss, but that doesn't mean they are not touched by it. It's also possible that Kalameet is proof that the Abyss existed prior to Manus, perhaps in a different form, but the most likely scenario, but still purely supposition, is that Kalameet lost his scales to the Abyss, intentionally or otherwise, and in losing his scales, lost his weakness to lightning and gained certain abyssal qualities. His resistance to lightning, along with all other elements, may be why Anor Londo didn't want to mess with him. Black and red dragons are often the mightiest, and as Dark Souls has no red dragon, the Hellkite Wyvern doesn't count, I guess we have to give it to Kalameet. By the time of Dark Souls 2, Kalameet is long gone, even if followers of the dragon cult may be using armor forged from his scales. But we have some new dragons. The most obvious answers for strongest here would be Sinh and the Ancient Dragon, but there is rather compelling evidence that the Ancient Dragon is some sort of experiment of Audia's. Whilst it is no doubt powerful, Sinh is the more compelling choice here, as he is free from Andiel's grubby tree hands. It was Dark Souls 2 which started to muddy the waters a little in regards to dragons having souls. The Ancient Dragon drops a giant soul, and whilst there is an Ancient Dragon's soul that can be found in the dreamlike memory, that can be explained away as it's technically a dream and memory. But what about Sinh? He certainly drops a soul. Even still, we can explain that away because it gives us Yorg's spear, so it's probably something closer to Yorg's soul that has fused with the dragon. Or Sinh, not being an ancient dragon, is a new breed of dragon who have developed souls. And we'll touch on that concept of dragons developing souls a little more with Midir in a moment. We don't know much about Sinh, but my guess would be that he's a descendant of ancient dragons, not an actual ancient dragon. He is evolved and adapted, which is why he's resistant to lightning. Similar to the Gaping Dragon from Dark Souls, I think he's a descendant of ancient dragons who has been warped by his surroundings. It's very interesting to me, the idea that dragons are very adaptive in Dark Souls, that they sort of absorb their environments in a chameleon-like manner, taking on its traits and aspects. Sinh might not have scales of immortality, but his scales are extremely corrosive, which is another sort of defense. If you smack him, well, it's going to degrade your weapon. As for Dark Souls 3, Darkeater Midir is a fellow descendant of ancient dragons. But strangely, Midir was used by the gods, raised by them it seems, and used to swallow up the Abyss, which not only gave Midir certain dark powers, but appears to have given him a soul, in a manner no doubt rather similar to rats having humanity from nibbling corpses. That or the developers made a pretty huge retcon by just deciding that dragons now have souls. But that's ultimately not too important in this discussion. Midir is no doubt the strongest dragon, and only dragon in Dark Souls 3, as the Storm King appears to be a wyvern, and the dragons in Lothric are, again, I think, closer to wyverns. In terms of feats, Midir is largely relegated to being the eternal abyss vacuum cleaner. Perhaps another thing that dragons are, whilst not untouched by the abyss, resistant to being corroded by it, to the extent humans and gods are. Kalameet was feared by Anor Londo. Sinh more or less wiped out Shulver when he was awoken by Sir Yorg. Darkeater Midir was tasked to eternally look over the abyss, which has certainly had an effect on him. Then we have the Divine Dragon from Shadows Die Twice. Well, he has divine wind and maybe poison powers, and the gift of immortality is tied to him. I don't think he has lightning powers though. There's lightning in the fight, but I don't think he's using it. He could be though. But he's more or less the only dragon in the game, and frankly, as much as I like him, I don't think he'd stand much of a chance here, despite his divinity and clear importance. Which leads us to Elden Ring, the hardest one to pick a clear winner for. We have a lot of dragons in Elden Ring. Beyond that, a lot of extremely powerful ones. Graol, the mother of dragons, who is the largest living dragon we've ever seen in a Souls game. Grandsax, one of the largest dead dragons. Then we have Fortisax, Landsax, and of course Placidusax, rounding out the ancient dragons. I think I need to give the win to Placidusax here. Although there's a few vague hints that Placidusax isn't strictly speaking a dragon, considering he doesn't take bonus damage from dragon killing items, such as Dragon Wound Grease. The most likely scenario, I suppose, is simply that Placidusax, the king of the dragons, the lord of the dragons, ascended in some form, as he is also a form of Elden Lord, so he shed the weakness of his children. Maybe it's just an oversight. Although some people will point out that, oh, he's called the Dragon King, the Dragonlord, he has to be a dragon. Not necessarily. Just as the first example that comes to mind, A Song of Ice and Fire has dragon lords. They aren't actually dragons, they are just the lord of dragons. And yes, Placidusax does look very dragony. For the sake of this video, I'm just going to assume that he is a dragon. He's just a unique type of dragon that is above all others. He's the god of dragons. Ancient dragons, such as all the other Sax dragons, Landsax, Fortisax, and so on, are distinguished from other or lesser dragons, and the Cragsblade also remarks on the paltry mortal dragons. So perhaps Placidusax is just the OG dragon in Elden Ring, rendering him far, far stronger. I know there are some incarnations of Dracula in some universes that don't share the weaknesses of lesser vampires. In that same vein, his breath attack doesn't really benefit from dragon-related tools. Placidusax is either not technically a dragon, but still their lord and king, or he's just a level above. You might compare him with Marika in that sense, I suppose. Is she technically human or Numan? Sort of, but she's also very different from the average lands betweener. There we have it, at any rate. Dragon God, Kalameet, Sinh, Midir, the Divine Dragon, and Placidusax. Let's talk about our two gods here. The Secular Dragon and the Dragon God are really hard to fit into this conversation. On the one hand, the Secular Dragon from Shadows Die Twice is kinda weak. On the other hand, it's also kinda immortal, as in it might be completely immortal, not just smack it hard enough and it will die. But considering Wolf only needed a few tears, we'll never know. The Dragon God from Demon Souls, meanwhile, yes, it's called God, and it's very big, but we've virtually no information on it, and you can kind of just shoot it a few times and it dies. Nor does it seem like it has really anything particularly special that it can do beyond punching goobers. Maybe the Dragon God punched the Secular Dragon so hard that's how it ended up in Japan. Anyway, now that my cat is done crunching his food in the loudest possible way he could, the easiest one to look at here is Sinh. His primary strength would be his poison in this situation. As everyone here is a dragon, they can all fly, Dragon God and Sakura Dragon as the exception, but Sinh is the only one with poison, if we don't count the Sakura's old wooden men. Unfortunately for Sinh, Kalameet is immune to poison, Midir is immune to poison, Placidusax is not immune to poison. In fact, Placidusax is the most vulnerable to statuses out of all the various dragons here. As for me, I usually melted Placidusax with Black Flame as it wiped out his huge health pool. Percentage damage. Either way, I think it's safe to say that Sin's major unique aspect being useless against Midir and Kalameet means that he, at best, has no distinct advantages over them, and at worst, he's got nothing going for him where he defied them. Placidusax isn't immune to poison, but he can fly, and in a sense teleport, so he could move away from the poison, if not blast it away with his own breath. What about Midir? What is his unique aspect here? Well, that's just the thing, he doesn't really have one. Unless we're counting his abyssal power up, but his abyssal powers don't give him any particular advantage against the other dragons. He has size going for him, he is pretty big and agile, but he's also weak to lightning, and anything that damages abyssal entities. Not that the other dragons have that, but Placidusax does have lightning at his disposal. Kalameet's unique gimmick would be his Eye of Calamity, which shows that he has at least some sort of telekinesis, kind of. Marking you with his eye renders you, again, either extremely unlucky, or just turns your bones to jelly, as it makes you take twice as much damage. Here's the thing, would that work on someone as large as Midir, Placidusax? There's no reason to suggest it wouldn't, but the only thing we've ever seen him use it on happens to be a tiny, undead dude. All the same, it's reasonable to assume this is partially, if not primarily, the reason Anor Londo feared him. Placidusax has his lightning breath, which he can use in a sweeping, chaotic frenzy, rather like Midir's atomic breath arena sweep. Placidusax can also teleport, in some manner. So whilst he's rather immobile on the ground, he's a lot more agile once he starts flying and teleporting. So Midir has no distinct advantages over Kalameet and Placidusax other than perhaps his size and brute force, at least so far as I can see. Placidusax has lightning powers which he can use against Midir as an advantage, a type advantage. Kalameet is resistant to anything the other two can throw out, meaning that their best bets would be simply to club him to death. And we have no way of knowing if Kalameet's double damage debuff would work on them, but I can't see why it wouldn't. It's possible it wouldn't work on, other dragons, but neither of them have any sort of curse immunity that we're aware of. Midir's only real advantage here is his size and physicality, which could go either way against Kalameet. But I'm inclined to say Kalameet is stronger because, again, Anor Londo was afraid of Kalameet. The gods used Midir as a hoover. Placidusax, I don't believe he has any time control powers as some people seem to think he has. But that's getting a bit into the realm of things I mentioned at the start of the video. Oh, he can stop time and all that. Probably not. For me, it still comes down to Placidusax and Kalameet. Both of them seem to be very hardy survivors. The Black Dragon is the last of the ancient dragons, and Placidusax appears to have lost at least one of his heads, maybe more, and is still going strong. The Dragonlord has more powers, and 2 heads are better than 1. 4 eyes are better than 1, for that matter. So all signs are pointing towards Placidusax as the winner, as the strongest Souls dragon, at least from the way I'm looking at it. Still, what do you think? Let me know in the comments, and until next time, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon, if I'm not playing Dragon's Dogma 2. I'm probably playing it right now, as you're watching this video. Now I'm jealous of future me. Sad,